12 years ago, George Lucas and Bob Iger signed a deal that allowed Disney to acquire Lucasfilm, and that included our beloved Star Wars. So the question is, 12 years from now, are we better off? My name is Tim Costello, and joining me here on Trust in the Force is my good friend, Vactor. How are you doing today, sir?
Maybe you've heard I'm all the Jedi, so I've got that going for me.
Yes, that quote came from the new Kyber crystal that you can put in your Jedi holocron that says all
Ooh.
these really cool Ray things that are supposed to be post Rise of Skywalker. Vector, how do you feel about these lines that are being spoken, giving kind of perspective and recontextualizing all the events of the sequel trilogy?
Coming out of Rise of Skywalker, I was not the happiest guy in town. Looking back on it 5 years later, I think these Ray quotes give me a better understanding, give me a better sense of what was going on in Rise of Skywalker and what they want to do moving forward. And that really excites me. So I want to see what happens with this Ridley movie, with this Ray movie, and the
Yeah,
future of Star Wars. That's what I'm really excited about because the whole premise of the sequels was kind of pushing Star Wars forward, pushing it to the next step. And I think whatever they decide to do right now is going to be very important as far as the future goes because when those sequels first came out, it seemed like their plan was, okay, we're going to do a movie every year and we're going to alternate between episode and side story, episode side story. And then like halfway through that, they kind of got cold feet and said, "Oh no, Solo didn't do that great, so we're not doing that anymore."
yeah.
So I want to see what is their plan after this Ray movie because we haven't heard anything besides the Mando and Grogu movie. There's nothing else announced. So I want to know what is their plan moving forward. And these quotes give me some hope in that direction of, hey, it looks like there is going to be some type of a plan and some type of a direction that they're moving in.
Yeah, I remember reading these because you sent me this article about where these came from, and reading these like really just put everything in perspective of those films. Because coming out of Rise of Skywalker, I actually unfortunately found out about Rey being a Palpatine before I saw the movie. Um,
Oh wow.
so so I was like, okay, all right. I remember thinking that's odd. Okay, whatever. But so I knew that going in. Um, but I don't think the reveal itself happened the way it happened worked. Ray saying I'm Ray Skywalker didn't work for me. Just felt like a retcon. Because when we saw that first trailer for The Force Awakens, I remember feeling a very sense that whoever this Ray character was going to be connected to the Skywalkers. And when The Force Awakens came out, I felt like I was leaning towards that. But then when The Last Jedi came out, it seemed like they were leaning towards another way, and I was just very confused about. I mean, with the direction they were going was fine, but then they walked it back again, and so it just kept going back and forth, and I was just very confused. I was hoping for a focus on the Skywalker family yet again, and there was some of that, but not enough. There was one quote that I really liked about how that I was trained by Luke and Leia, and that Ben gave his life for me, and that's why I took their name. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I think if that was said in the film, I think it probably wouldn't have rubbed as many people the wrong way, and we wouldn't have seen as many wonderful memes. But hey, we all love memes, so uh,
Yes.
um, so rewind 12 years ago. It's October 2012. There hasn't been a Star Wars movie in a long time, and there's been TV shows. We had the Clone Wars at that point, and then you find out that Disney, the House of Mouse, that you and I both love, has bought Star Wars and is going to be making new Star Wars things. What were your thoughts at this time? Like take us back there, Vactor. Where was Vactor at
Yes.
this point?
Well, at that point, I was single. I was not with child. I was just on my own. That 2012 was very interesting because Disney had already bought Marvel 3 years earlier in
Yes.
2009.
Mhm.
And when the Star Wars announcement happened, I was like, "Oh, they did it again? They bought another huge property that I love." And part of me was kind of like, "Oh, okay, well, getting everything under one umbrella, that's gonna be fun for me. I'm gonna be able to go to Disneyland and see all these Star Wars things and Marvel things." But then the other side of me was like, I wonder if that's gonna stifle their creativity if Lucas Lucasfilm was on their own or if the Marvel creatives were on their own. What is Disney, that umbrella of Disney, gonna be like? So, it was an interesting time of kind of optimism for me of, "Hey, this is gonna be great, this is gonna be fun," but also like, "Oh, they did it again?" Like, kinda confused, "Man, Disney has a lot of money."
Yeah, yeah. I remember seeing this, and I was like, well, to me, it felt I didn't feel like, is this going to stifle their creativity? Because at the time I was just thinking, because the big thing that came out of this was Star Wars Episode 7 is going to come out in 2015, and that was something. I mean, going back, I heard about it, Episode 7 possibly happening. That George Lucas had this plan, and but I'd given up hope of it actually happening because George Lucas was very specific, like, this is it for movies, and like, I'm not making any more Star Wars or anything. Um, and so, coming out of that, I was like, oh, this is great. But I was working in a retail setting, and everyone was just like, oh, they're going to Disneyfy Star Wars, and they're gonna do these things for Star Wars. And my reaction was, well, look what they've done. Like, they bought Marvel, like you said, in 2009, and we had several successful movies. This year at this time, we just had the Avengers, and so that was just a huge triumph for geekdom. And so I wasn't really too worried about stifling creativity. Maybe I should have been. um, but I was really excited about more Star Wars content. Um, I think in the coming years we saw kind of a culling of Star Wars content. LucasArts was dissolved, which was a huge video game source, as you know. Um, the novels that we had been pumped out for a long time had decided, no, those aren't canon anymore. Those, we're going to be doing new novels that are going to be more along the lines of the films, and that interested me a little bit. So, like, and the first one we were going to get was Star Wars Aftermath, which was going to be taking place right after Return of the Jedi. Really good if you haven't read it. Um, and so, um, yeah. So, and I go back to what I was saying at the beginning, is if feeling like it was just just a perfect marriage, because we were already having Disney with Star Wars at this time, because not only did we have Star Tours, which is was always just a highlight for me when I go to the Disney park. I mean, still
Yes.
to this day, even now that they've been adding things to Star Tours, it's always like, I got to go to Star Tours. It is not a trip to a Disney park if I haven't gone to Star Tours. And so, but not only did we have that, we had Star Wars weekends. Um, at the Disney parks. So, and where you do Jedi training, you could do all these cool things. You'd have Mickey in a Jedi robe. It
Yeah,
had
Jedi Mickey was the
Jedi
best.
Mickey. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love those toys. Uh, and seeing all those characters dressed up as Star Wars characters. That was really, so. It just seemed like the next step of the evolution of the brand. So it wasn't really like a shock to my system. Like, oh my gosh, it's going to be the end of everything.
Right. Yeah, and for me, it was we're getting new stuff. That was, like,
Yeah.
to me, the biggest thing about the Disney acquisition was we're getting new Star Wars stuff, and like you said, the thing of there wasn't any before, where there wasn't any plans for new ones. That was what got my attention was, "Oh, wow, they are making it is confirmed we are getting new Star Wars movies in the theater." So, I was really excited about that and what potential, because it was like, what is the story gonna be? What
Right.
is gonna be after Return of the Jedi? So that was what
Yeah.
really got me excited.
Yeah, and just the discussion about what's going to be after Return of the Jedi, because like this era of storytelling, if you were reading the books, you were already exposed to kind of this era of storytelling with Imperial remnants, clones of the Emperor, and things that we would see in television and in film, um, going forward once Disney bought Star Wars. And so there was all the talk like, oh, are they going to adapt this book, or are they going to tell this story? And they came right out like, no, well, no, this is going to be an original story. And so then we were like left again once like what Star Wars going to be going forward. And you talk about Star Wars movies in the theaters. I remember seeing like I went out to see Star Wars: The Clone Wars animated feature because like who knows if I'm ever going to see a Star Wars movie in the theater again besides re-releases.
Right.
And so, yeah, so that was just,
New Star Wars
new
content.
Star Wars stuff, new Star Wars stuff. Um, so, so now that, um, so you were kind of on the like you were excited, but you were also a little nervous about what what could happen. I was obviously very positive about it. Um, so some things that have come out from the Disney sale. Um, some positive things. What are some positive things that have come out in the intervening years that you've seen, that have come out since Disney bought Star Wars?
To me, the biggest positives are the new, um I was gonna say franchises, but the new, man, I can't even think of the word, but the things that we have attached onto, Mandalorian, Grogu, a lot of the High Republic stuff,
Hmm.
a lot of the video games. I've loved the Jedi Survivor and Jedi Fallen Order games, as well as, like you said, new stuff at Star Tours, just re-releasing Star Tours and updating it to the current modern 3D, as well as being able to switch out the locations, and it's not the same static thing over and over again. That has been fantastic, and I love that they're still doing it to this day. They're still
Yeah,
updating it, they just recently added Ahsoka content to it, and it's like, man, that goes back to Walt Disney's original thing about Disneyland always changing. He's like, "It's never gonna be the same, it's never gonna be just one static thing." So, I love that that has come out of the Disney era, but also a lot of the comic book stuff that um that we've gotten since the Disney acquisition has been fantastic, and they really brought in, like, fantastic writers, artists, all of these great top tier people to come in on all of these books, and that's what I think has made those comics successful, is the creative talent that Marvel was able to get onto the different books. So those things have been fantastic for me.
yeah. As far as for me, just the additions of of these books, and also these additions of these new series. I mean, we wouldn't have gotten the Mandalorian without Disney buying Star Wars. We wouldn't have gotten we wouldn't have gotten the High Republic, because this kind of synergy between comics and novels that exist in the High Republic, and that's why I kind of really sink my teeth into, because our mutual friend Schaff and you and I have been. I mean, I'm rereading, but you guys are discovering it for the first time, and it's like you're sharing these panels with me, like, oh yeah, that was, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was in a novel. That was in a novel, and to see these kind of the synergy of like it's happening here in the book, and then it's happening here in 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 the comic, has been really exciting for me in the High Republic setting. Um, yeah, like the presence at the Disney parks has been phenomenal. I think one of the more positive things about the Disney sale is it's gotten Star Wars more into the collective public consciousness than it was before. Because for a long time, between Return of the Jedi, the prequels, Clone Wars, it seems like Star Wars was kind of a niche market, and like was just among a certain group of fans. And I love those fans. I'm one of them. You're one of them. So I love those people. But to see, someone talking about, someone, in the grocery store talking about, hey, I loved the new episode of The Mandalorian. I loved the new episode of Andor. I loved that new movie. Like that was really good. And seeing like May the 4th, which was just a fan thing, just like become like a huge thing that everybody talks about. When you're on social media, it like there's huge public events. In where you're in your town. I mean, in my town, there's lots of events. In my state, in Utah, there's lots of events happening. That are Star Wars related. That are related to May the 4th, and that is very exciting to me. We can
I
always
love all of
count.
those.
Yeah, we can always count that Disney Plus is going to release something Star Wars related on May the 4th. We can always count on it. Even this year, when I thought, hey, maybe they're not going to do it, they came through and they released Tales of the Empire, and I got to watch that on May the 4th, and that was really exciting.
The continuity between a lot of the storytelling, and that goes for comic books, video games, movies, TV shows, and not just Star Wars. Like with superhero things, Marvel and
Yeah,
DC, any properties that are able to blend those things together and give you that cohesive experience of, hey, this is one world and I'm just dipping in different mediums, and the storytelling is just great in all those mediums. That's the bottom line: is are they good stories, and do we want to come back, and do we care about the characters? Actually, that's another thing about the Disney park presence. All of the characters being there, Mando, Grogu,
Boba
Sabine,
Boba
Ahsoka,
Fett's there. Yeah,
all of these things are fantastic. And then they got that new Disney technology where there's an actual lightsaber that comes out, like a it it's not metal, but it's not plastic. Like I don't know what the technology is, but it's like it looks like it's a real lightsaber.
so you're
So
talking about the
that type
lightsabers
of
you
stuff.
build.
No, the one that only the cast members have. So
Oh
like
yeah,
I've
yeah, yeah,
seen
yeah.
Ray with it.
I don't know how
It's
they
like
do
a
that, but it's incredible.
telescoping
Yeah,
lightsaber, and it's like that technology I love, putting the Disney Imagineering behind Star Wars. It just you're combining
yeah,
all these
it's
top
incredible.
talents and these creative people together, and then this is what you're getting. You're getting these type of
Okay,
products. But the Disney cruises, like having Star Wars at sea, all of
yeah,
those things.
which
I
I've not
think
done yet, but I want to.
I I also have not done, and I would like to. Man, I wish I had gotten to go on that Galactic Star Cruiser, the hotel that they
Yeah,
had that experience. That would
that
have been
seemed really
fun.
cool.
But I think the pro of the Disney acquisition is the reach that Disney has, and we're talking about like marketing, all of the different relationships, connections Disney has in the industry. They have their own television station. They have ABC, like they have their own channel. They have Disney Plus. They have their own streaming network. They have sports teams. They have all of these things that Disney, can or Star Wars can tap into, I should say,
We could have
through the
Star Wars
Disney arm.
trailer. We can have Star Wars trailers on Monday Night Football, or and I'm not a sports person, so I was like, well, that's cool that people who wouldn't normally watch Star Wars something are going to be seeing. Oh wow, there's a new Star Wars thing. Neat.
Right.
And they don't know about it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the pros. What are some cons that you have seen from the that you yourself have observed and maybe not agree with, but yeah, I can see the point there.
The biggest con for me of the Disney era of Star Wars so far has been a lack of focus. And you mentioned it earlier with the sequel trilogy. It felt like it started out one way, then it turned to another thing, and then it tried to pivot back to the original,
Yeah.
and it just didn't feel like a cohesive narrative. And, you know, I'm privy to a lot of entertainment stuff. I know that television shows don't have the entire thing mapped out from the start
What?
because that was that's a
you
big
tell you
like
telling me you telling me that they didn't have the ending of Lost prepared from the inception of the show? That's
that is
bull.
the biggest example that my friends and I always talk about is like people thought they should have had the ending of Lost planned out from day one. And well, they
Couldn't.
didn't have that planned out. They didn't know what they were doing. And it's like, no, did you know how a TV show works? I understand that they're writing it as they go. Now,
Right.
I like that they have a structure and a plan on Lost. They had that, but with the Disney Star Wars movies, it just felt like they were handing off, okay, JJ made his episode 7. All right, let me toss it off to Ryan Johnson and now you go pick it up. Um, I'm not going to, give you any notes. I'm not going to give you any ties. You just go and do your thing. And then Ryan Johnson, oh, okay, he was supposed to hand it off to Colin Trevorrow, but then he got let go. And then back to JJ. And it was like, wait a minute. JJ said he wasn't going, he was done with it on episode 7. Now he's coming back for episode 9.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like there was a structured plan. Palpatine did not feel like he was supposed to be the overarching villain throughout from the beginning. We still, to this day, we still don't have a good
Don't know about
explanation for
Snoke.
Snoke. You and I were talking about that in our Bad Batch coverage. And the lineage of Rey being a Palpatine, I think was a misstep. I would have preferred if she was just nobody. She didn't have a tie to anything. Um, them trying to market it as the Skywalker saga and putting 7, 8, 9, and it's like, okay, we want to fit it in to the other ones and calling the last one Rise of Skywalker. And that
Which the title
title
does not make
doesn't,
sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me.
yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. So
In fact,
everything,
when I heard of that title, when they revealed it at Celebration and I saw it in the trailer, Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, that just smacks like, okay, they're retconning a bunch of stuff. Uh, that was the
right.
feeling I had. And when
Yeah.
I went into the theater, that's exactly like, okay, yeah, they're retconning stuff. They're retconning stuff. Yeah, oh yeah, that's a retcon. And so, yeah,
Yep.
and so I was a little. That's what disappointed me about that film, is because everything just felt like a retcon. And yeah,
Yeah. I
um,
just I wish it felt like, oh, okay, they had the outline for all 3. They had a plan, and then the writers can come in and play around, actually fill
right,
in the storyline of what exactly happened.
right.
That's what I would have
There
preferred.
wasn't a plan for for the prequels and and the original trilogy, but George Lucas and his writing staff that he had was able to make it seamless and make it felt like there was a plan, and that's the trick. If you can feel like, if this can feel cohesive and everything matches up, then you've done a successful beginning, middle, and end story. Yeah.
Yeah. They feel like they're all one thing.
Yeah, yeah, and they do, and they found a nice balance in TV and comics and books as making them feel cohesive, and like you don't have to consume everything, but you're rewarded if you do. Whereas the films didn't feel as cohesive as they could have been, and
Yeah.
Solo was a huge misstep for me. And when I, like you, follow these entertainment news because I love Star Wars and I want to be kept in the loop. Like, oh, this is happening and this is happening and this is happening. There have been so many, oh, they're doing this Star Wars thing. Nope, no, they're not anymore.
Yeah.
We
Right.
had the
Right.
people from Game of Thrones that were going to do like a movie or a series of movies. We had Ryan Johnson that was going to do a movie. We had Patty Jenkins, who is going to do Rogue Squadron. She's not going to do Rogue Squadron. She is going to do Rogue Squadron. Um, we have the Taika Waititi Star Wars movie that maybe is or isn't happening. We had a Josh Trank solo movie that might have been a Boba Fett movie, but with the box office disparage of Fan Four Stick, we didn't get that. So it just feels like like Lucasfilm is just like, oh, these people are really hot right now, let's grab them, and then those people are just like, then they're like, they're not hot anymore, and people don't care, and so
Right.
yeah, that has been a disparagement. Um, I want to run some common complaints that I've noticed that I've seen over the past decade and a couple of years. Is and the big thing that I've seen, uh, um, one of the big things is that Disney has lost money with Star Wars. That their investment has not returned on Star Wars, and I think that is the biggest load of hooey I've ever seen. Because when you factor in not just the park stuff, like let's just like say, Galaxy's Edge, all the money you spend there, but then you talk about merchandise like you have on your back. I mean, I've got a lightsaber over there. I've got Star Wars shirts over there. I've got Star Wars stuff over in my living room, and all these things that, and like the Disney is somehow losing money. No. That's I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of that, like, that never made sense to me, that argument. I've seen it in the YouTube comments. The only thing that I can think of how that makes sense to people is, okay, I didn't like this, so obviously it lost money. That's why Disney, they're not doing the same way. They're not doing the same numbers. But you look at the box office for the sequel trilogy, they're up there with the top. Like if you name the top 5 highest grossing Star Wars movies, the sequel trilogy is 3 of those.
Right.
So, and Rogue One is another one. That's also Disney Star Wars. Um, I don't understand that mentality that they're losing money. Disney even came out a month ago or 2 months ago, and they talked about the numbers that they have made since buying Lucasfilm, and it was like they bought it for $4 billion, and they've gotten a return on their money.
Oh
So
yeah.
that should tell you something about them not losing in the Disney era of Star Wars. It's just ridiculous to think that because you didn't like it, oh, it's obviously lost money. Now, if you told me that they bombed all 3 movies at the box office, people aren't showing up to the parks, then it starts to make sense to me. Then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe Disney is not making a return on their investment, but no, they're making out like a fat rabbit.
But yeah, exactly. And the movies that did not bomb, like they were very successful. I mean, maybe lots of people didn't like them, and maybe the movies themselves weren't good, but they made money. And you look at Galaxy's Edge. Galaxy's Edge is always packed. Like it's probably the most packed area in any Disney park. I mean, you go to Galaxy's Edge and there's just tons of people there. I mean, you see every May the 4th, they have the lightsaber igniting ceremony where, everybody ignites their lightsabers. Those are a lot of people. And in theory, I would love to be part of those people, but
Right.
um unfortunately I don't have the mental willpower to maintain in that atmosphere. Uh, um the second biggest complaint that I've seen, as far as Disney ruining Star Wars, is, and I know you've seen it, as a person of color, that Star Wars has now become, just like with every other thing in Hollywood, social justice wars. And like we see, like, more female characters, we see more characters of color taking center stage. um and I think it's time that we see more different kinds of people in these things, because we saw the the white characters in the original trilogy in the 70s and 80s, and so it's different time. I i have a niece who loves Ray, but you go online and you see that she's the most maligned part of Star Wars right now, and so much so that, like,
Right.
a Ray movie, I don't care.
Part of me wonders, are we just in an environment where we're hearing the vocal minority, where it's
Right.
the the minority of people who don't like Ray are the loudest voices that we're hearing over and over again?
Uh-huh.
Because I almost feel like, well, if everyone hates Ray, then why is Disney doing a Ray movie? Are they Do they think, oh yeah, they're gonna try to force Ray down our throats? To me, Disney is not gonna lose money. Like they have all kind of, reports that they do. They have all kind of scouting things, and they're like, okay, is this going to make money? Is this going to make money? They know if people who are not going to turn out just for a Ray movie, they they have some type of an indication of what the audience is feeling. But we'll see when that movie comes out. We'll see the box office numbers on that. But I'm like you. It feels like it's a no-brainer to have diversity
Yeah.
in all of these things. And I think a lot of the arguments are, well, it was always that way, so why did you change it, right? If diversity had been a thing in the 50s, 60s, 70s, then yeah, we wouldn't need it now. We wouldn't
Right.
need programs for that. And people, that's another thing, is people are always like, "Oh yeah, there's these agendas that Disney has, and there's these programs where they have to get in either minorities, women, or LGBTQ,
The nerve.
they have to get these things in there." And to me, I'm like, okay, number one, I don't care if it's diverse. I care if it's a good storyline, if it's a good character, if it's a good story. I think there is a need for those type of agendas and programs because everything before that was all one thing. There wasn't a lot of diversity before. So yeah, you do need agendas. Otherwise, it's just going to be the same thing over and over and over again. And even that goes behind the camera too. I want to see more writers, producers, directors being more diverse and more people of color. Those are the things that I want to see in my Star Wars. I don't see that as a problem. And when people say Disney is too woke, or they're, like you said, social justice warriors or social justice wars, to me, I'm when I first heard that term, I was like, what? Why is that a bad thing? That sounds like what you want. You
Right.
want to be a diverse cast. You want to have all these things. And now, if it's a bad story, that's another thing. Like I said, if they're bad characters, bad stories, whatever, then I'm with you. But to say, well, that is a bad thing because it's a minority or because it's a woman, that doesn't make any sense to me. The other big thing that I see all the time is that Ray is a Mary Sue. She got her everything came easy to her, and I think that whole thing comes from them trying to make her be the parallel to Luke Skywalker in the original trilogy. If
and
you think
and
about it,
everything came easy to Luke. Just as I mean, Luke could
yes,
fly, Luke could fix things, Luke could. I mean, Anakin the same way. I mean, he had they
right,
both had Jedi powers, but because it's a woman, they have a problem with it. And
right,
but like with you, like there's no such thing as a bad character. You told me this in terms of comics. There's no such thing as a bad character. There's such a thing as a bad writer because you look. I mean, I've mentioned it before. Solo was a huge misstep for me. I have not seen it since the theater. Mostly because
same.
when we saw it, my wife and I saw it. The next day, our son was born. So like, well, I guess we don't need to see that anymore. So luckily, it was a bad movie, so I didn't feel bad about it. But Han Solo was not written well in that film, and a character that I had mostly written off in that film, Kira, played by Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones. Uh, she's in that film, and I was like, I don't like this character. I don't like this character. And then you turn around years later, and I get this same character in comics written by Charles Soule, and I'm like, this character is great. I love this character, and it's
Yes,
because Charles Soule
yes,
was able to take this character that had been largely discarded and make her three-dimensional, make her work. And so, yeah, that's yeah. So, but I'm all for diversity. I mean, the High Republic has a diverse cast of characters. We've got, people. We've got Jedi of color. And here's the thing: is they we live the Star Wars galaxy is a galaxy that is populated with aliens, like of different creatures. And so why is it if there's a human of color, oh no, how dare we? Oh, but Lando Calrissian, he's a person of color. It's like, so he's the only one we're allowed to have. I mean, that just
right.
doesn't make sense to
That's
me.
the funniest. That's the funniest argument to me when people say, "Oh yeah, it was diverse." we had Lando. And it's like, yeah, you had
One,
one. That
one,
doesn't make it diverse when it's
one.
like 99% of the rest of the cast is all white. It's like that doesn't make sense to me. And again, those are a product of their time,
Yeah,
and that's something. If we could go back and make those the 70s diverse, okay, yeah, that's we probably should have did that back then, but
yeah.
we didn't. So now we're here in it's crazy to me that we're in 2020 and we're still having these type of conversations. Even on our other channel, This Comic Cooks, where we talk about comic books, there's things about the X-Men where people are like, oh, there's LGBTQ and there's pronouns and there's all these things. And it's like the X-Men has always represented the
Either
different,
race
like,
or gay or gay relations, either one of the two.
right, right.
And
Right.
so,
So
yeah,
it doesn't make it doesn't make sense to me to still be talking about this in 2020. I remember growing up in the 90s and thinking, "Oh yeah, racism is gone. There's no problem. Everybody cares about diversity. Everybody wants to be like everyone wants to have an equal shot." And then now it's like
and
if
then
I could tell
and
myself
then
in
you get along.
1990,
Then you
no,
get
this is still
online.
going to be going on in 2020, I'd be like, "What are you
Yeah,
talking about?"
yeah,
But I also grew up in a Air Force base where everybody was there was all it was very diverse on the Air Force base. Everybody had to kind of get along and we were the only Americans in foreign countries. So it was like we kind of bonded over the fact that we were all in the same space. And so those my experiences on the Air Force base was oh, there is no like it we didn't that we don't see color, that thing. Like,
ah,
there was never even a thought of diversity, it wasn't even a thing. It was just, "Oh, yeah, I have all these friends of different races
sure.
and different ethnicities."
Yeah, yeah. So those were the two big complaints that I've seen in regards to Disney Star Wars. Has there been
Yeah.
any others that you've seen?
Those are the biggest ones. Daisy Ridley well, no, I shouldn't say just Daisy Ridley. Finn, um, Phasma, a lot of the specific, like, characters are getting attacked and saying, "Oh, it's Disney, so it doesn't matter. It's not canon because it's Disney." And to me, it's like you can't really pick and choose what another brand is doing and say, "Oh yeah, it's not my Star Wars, so I'm not going to acknowledge until they come back to what I want." Like it doesn't make sense. It's
Yeah,
like either you like it or you don't, but it's canon. It's Star Wars and there's some stories I like, there's some stories I don't like.
yeah,
There's
same.
not all right, I like Lucas Star Wars, but I don't like Disney Star Wars. No, there's there's great things and there's not so great things. We talked about a couple of them in this show. And if you don't like one thing, just go on to the next thing. Like that's what really doesn't make any sense to me is people who spend so much time talking about so much they hate this show or they hate this character. And it's like, if you don't like it, don't buy it. Don't, vote with your wallet. Don't spend your money on that thing and then spend your money on the things you like and go on to the next thing. Like, I don't
Yeah,
understand that.
I mean, we're in a point where like, well, if I mean, I was not a fan of Andor. There was a lot of people that were a fan of Andor, but I wasn't. But but yeah, I know. But and that's okay because there's still lots to love about Star Wars. There's things that aren't great about Star Wars that we've talked about. And, there's other shows that maybe I wasn't a huge fan of. I wasn't a huge fan of the Book of Boba Fett for the most part. But we're not here to talk about that. Um, uh, but
You know what? You know what would be fantastic? If this Ray movie is great, like if this is like an amazing movie, it turns people around on the character of Ray. I wonder, what that would do for Disney Star Wars. Like people's interpretation of Disney Star Wars right now is highly negative online. And so would that flip it if you say, "Oh yeah, this is a great movie." And now you can see Ray as this is a character that's been allowed to grow and she's doing things that we hadn't seen before in the previous movies.
yeah, I mean, and it would just shine a light that it wasn't the character that was bad. It was the movies that they were in. I mean, I saw a thing that like basically painted the entire Star Wars trilogy like a family dynasty thing between the Skywalkers and the Palpatines, and I'm like, I'm sorry, what? And that was J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio's take on Rise of
That is
Skywalker, and that was like that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, we can be here all day talking
no.
about this kind of stuff. Not that I would mind, but but I'm gonna bring this back around to the question that we asked at the beginning of the show today: is 12 years later since Disney bought Lucasfilm and Star Wars, are we better off? Did Disney indeed ruin Star Wars, or are we just kind of in more or less the same place, but with just more?
In my eyes, there's a larger spread today. I feel like I'm talking about it with more people than ever.
Yeah,
There are more things that I can introduce my son to. There are more avenues like video games. Obviously, we had these things before in the Lucas era, but I think it just feels bigger now. It just feels like more part of our culture. And that to me is a good thing that Star Wars is bigger today than it's ever been. And there's more stories being told in novels, comic books, video games, all these different mediums. Besides TV shows, we before it was just movies.
yeah,
Now we have TV shows. We have an expansion of the franchise. And so 12 years later, there are certain things we are better off in, and then there are certain things that we are less um pulled back in. And that's not having George Lucas's voice. To me, that is
yeah.
probably the biggest loss of and that's actually, you know what? If we're gonna sum up like what did Disney do wrong after looking back on it 12 years later, I think the biggest mistake that they made was not including Lucas more in the creative side of it. And there's been stuff in Bob Iger's book. He talked about how the very first time he showed Lucas episode 7, and he was like, "Hey, what'd you think?" And Lucas was like, "Well, you didn't use any of my ideas." And he was under the impression when he sold off the rights, he had like an outline and he gave it to Disney. I want to number one, I want to see that outline.
Exactly.
And then
Yeah.
number two, why why did you not think that that would have worked? You know,
Right.
if you're the Disney brass or if you're the top guys at
In
Disney,
fact, in
why would you
fact,
say, "Oh yeah,
I remember.
we're going to move in a new
In
direction"?
fact, I remember that because there was a like a bunch of videos that were Kathleen Kennedy and George Lucas talking about Star Wars and the future of Star Wars,
Oh yeah.
and
I remember that. Yes.
and they seemed to indicate that George Lucas would still, have a voice, and that he would still be
Mm.
like consulted on these films, and it
Hmm.
made me wonder what happened and why that changed, and like why didn't we
Yeah.
get kind of like, oh well, you could do this. I mean, obviously we've seen pictures of George Lucas on set with with Grogu and Ahsoka and things, and hearing that he really liked Obi-Wan uh it was really encouraging. But like, yeah, I agree, I do miss George Lucas's voice. um i think I think we misstepped in films, and like, and the things we're not better off in, because I feel there's like you, there's some things that have been really great, and one of those is that I'm talking like you, I'm talking in Star Wars. I mean, I go to my math class and I have my AirPod cover, and it's at the time was a Mandalorian one, and the guy sits next to me. He's like, "Oh, you watching the Mandalorian?" Like, "Oh yeah, I'm loving it. You loving it?" I have a Star Wars podcast. I'm like, never. If I had been in that situation like 10 years ago, and I had like a thing like that, just sitting around, people were like, "Oh, you like Star Wars, huh? Okay." And it was just a very niche thing, and now it's a bigger thing, and I do like that. But like I said, I think we did misstep with
Yeah.
films, and I think we've seen that we've misstepped with films, because you know from the get go it seemed like there was going to be you know a steady influx of films, and once we got Disney Plus, we got TV shows, and I guess the indication was that there was going to be films and TV shows concurrently, and I was all on board with that. But then we get Solo, we get Rise of Skywalker, and then all of a sudden Star Wars movies are dead for the next one's coming out 2026. Like, they're dead for 7 years. And that has been kind of discouraging for me, because we're getting cool stuff with the Mandalorian and Grogu and and the animation stuff, but the TV shows don't get as widespread exposure to Star Wars as the films do, because that's where it's starting. And I hope we can get back to that, get back to really good Star Wars movies. Because I'm going to tell you that when I saw Episode 1 in the theater, seeing that fanfare and the opening crawl, like, I got chills, and I really want to see that again. But I think we can answer, for the most part, that Disney Star Wars is good overall, and it's not. Star Wars is not ruined. Star Wars is not dead. People are still as much interested in Star Wars, even more so now than they were 10 or 12 years ago. And that's
there's
all
still
we
great
have today
content
for
being put
Trust
out.
in the Force. Did you have any final thoughts, Vactor, that you wanted to leave out before we close today?
Just that I think when people say Disney ruined Star Wars, killed Star Wars is losing money or Disney is losing money because of Star Wars, I just look at them and I say, Bad Batch, Tales of the Jedi, Star Wars Visions, Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor, High Republic, all of these things are, and I will put Andor in there, as much as Tim doesn't want me to include it. I will put Andor
I
in
see
that
its value.
batch.
It just didn't work on levels for me. I see its value. It has strengths, but just didn't. There are some things that I just didn't like, but it still works.
Yes, and Mandalorian. So all of these things are things that we wouldn't have had without Disney, and I think you can look at all of these things and say this is not 100% crap, 100% garbage where people are like, I hate Star Wars now because of Disney. No, there's good things, there's bad things, but they're still going. It's still creating, we're still having conversations about it. We're still enjoying our time in this universe. And so that is the bottom line. I think Disney having their wing of marketing, their muscle, I think that's just a good thing for spreading Star Wars across the world.
Absolutely. And that's all we have for Trust in the Force. For those who are not unaware, Vactor, where can people find you on the internet?
Everything I do is on my Linktree. That's probably the easiest one. Linktree/Vactor, Vactor. You can see all of the YouTube things, all of the podcasting things, everything over on my
There you go.
Linktree.
And as for me, you can find me on Instagram, but you can also find me on my Substack, timwritestoday.substack.com. I just released something yesterday that was in the can for a while. So and as far as what we've covered here in Trust in the Force, we've got the Acolyte in a few weeks. And in the intervening times, we will be covering the High Republic graphic novels / comic books, the main story, the main title, and how that leads up and how that syncs up with the Acolyte. And so that's going to be very exciting. I'm very excited to hear you and Shoff's thoughts about these books. So I'm very excited. But you can follow us here on YouTube on Trust in the Force, and we will see you next time, where we would be honored if you would join us.
Trust only in the Force.